My name's Helen. I'm from Revelian. We're a psychometric test developer and supplier here in Australia. My background is organisational psychology, but I am from the UK, and I've been working in the assessment space for selection and development for about 10 years.
So my name's Dave Winsborough. I just spoke to you about one of the products that we're engaged in building with my company, Deeper Signals. My background is, I'm obviously from New Zealand, because you can tell by the accent, and I have a company over there. We just do a lot of psychometric psychological assessment in that country, and nice to be here.
Thanks. Likewise, I spoke earlier, Scott from Pymetrics. I'm based in Singapore, head up sales for Pymetrics for the APAC region, originally from New Zealand as well, actually. Probably can't tell the accent, been away a long time. But yeah, talent matching platform, supporting data-driven decisions across the full talent lifecycle with Pymetrics, and been with Pymetrics nearly 2 years. Prior to that, I was at LinkedIn.
And hi everyone, Tom Cornell, I'm the assessment lead for APAC for HireVue, based out of Sydney, but originally from the UK, if it wasn't obvious enough. So my background is in assessments, and at HireVue we are essentially a technology platform delivering video interviewing and assessments to help companies transform the hiring process.
All right, well, welcome all. And just a show of hands, who here is and would classify themselves as an assessment professional? Okay, so a handful, I'll go 10 to a dozen or so. So my principal question is, and we have 4 panelists, so obviously we're going to have to share time as we go. Assessments for me are very critically important to workforce planning, to doing analytics, yet they've been underappreciated. That's the reason you all are innovating. So my pointed question, and we'll just go the same order. What do you see assessments falling into this workforce strategy, workforce planning challenge that we have? Because it can be internal assessments, external assessments. So what do you see forthcoming, or what do you hope to see coming over the next 12, 24 months?
God, 12 to 24 months, that's very specific. Well, I have only been working in this space in Australia for 2 years. And I think the thing that I always want is to educate for hiring managers, not just HR professionals working within organisations, to really understand the value of psychometric assessment, what it can tell you about a person in terms of their abilities, their skills, yes, but also providing like holistic assessment of, deeper insights, what's really important to that person, what drives that person, what kind of culture they're going to fit into really well, and where they're going to face challenges, for people to really get the value from that all the way through the life cycle. So as you onboard someone, how can you be using that information, not just as a recruitment sense, but then how you choose to develop them, how they could be put forward for promotion, what's the right pathway for them through that organisation.
All right, thank you. Dave?
So the question was, what do we see coming in the next 12 to 24?
Right. For example, you're talking about self-reflection with deeper signals, which I love to see. And I presume that that's going to enable personal development as well as an organization trying to develop people. Is that a fair outcome that you see forthcoming?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, so when we think about the kinds of assessment that get done, we're interested in differences between people, and the predominant model that's turned up when, at least thinking about personality, hasn't changed for nearly 40 years now. And I don't think it's going to. I don't see anything radically new in that sense. So the base model for how we go about describing differences between people probably is not going to change. I think we've seen an interest in expanding it, so we're starting to see ever finer kind of gradations in terms of what we think we can measure. So Pymetrics, for example, talk about risk propensity, and they have various ways of assessing that. We might see a little more innovation in the input side. So we're starting to see games turn up, gamification. I mentioned before that we can extract personality from a range of signals really easily using machine learning, building models. But that borders on the unethical, I think, and it certainly leans into what's private and what's public data, and what do you want organisations to know and what don't you want organisations to know. Some of the research we did at Hogan, for example, I know HireVue are going to be engaged in around using emotion in reading people's faces. Phones do that stuff now. So the degree to which we could expand out and measure individual differences is quite large. I'm not sure how far we'll go. The bit that's missing for me is the so what. It's like, we use this and the criterion that we try and predict are just appallingly bad. Like, you tell me what good performance is and tell me an organisation that actually measures good performance. So there's enormous scope to innovate in that space. And then the last one is, beginning to integrate these data with other kind of measures from inside organisations. And it was really interesting thinking about the organisational network analysis. And I was just thinking in terms of layers. If you think about someone's values and how does that affect the way that relationships form or don't, and that's really untapped. I think.
Yeah, I love it, Scott.
Yeah, we're in that position as well, where we don't see ourselves as an assessment provider, talent matching platform, and we're working through our positioning around that. But I think one of the major things that we're seeing is the continued acceleration of gamification. Traditional assessment providers are now providing gamification. Companies like SHL. So we're seeing that as something that continues, but from a candidate experience standpoint, that's becoming a lot more important. And I think someone mentioned earlier that people don't want to invest 3 hours in actually going through an assessment anymore. So the assessments are starting to be viewed as cool again, and actually it's a great experience to go through. So actually being able to improve that candidate experience and actually provide more personal prompts to that candidate that's going through as well, and also not just looking at it as a recruitment tool, as a tool to be able to help them through as they grow their career with the organisation as well. So being able to have some visibility on that, I think, is great from a retention standpoint.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I think that's the really kind of the key point here, I think, is around the candidate engagement, the candidate experience piece. I think it's pretty fair to say that actually almost all of the companies we work for have largely been born out of the fact that candidates are unhappy with the current state of play. Mm-hmm. I know, Dave, you were talking earlier about candidates don't want to spend an hour, 2 hours going through a traditional personality questionnaire anymore. They expect something that's more engaging, quicker, more immersive for them. And I think that's led to the gamification movement that we're really seeing. And there's been a lot of talk today about humanizing people analytics, and I think it's interesting if you think about, we always refer to candidates, but actually, of course, these are ultimately people. Yeah. The clients who we work with and who buy our products obviously keep the lights on, but ultimately who we're trying to impact in the real world are the people who are going for their jobs, who are going for these assessments. I was speaking to someone the other day, yesterday in fact, who said that he was trying to get his first job after grad school and had gone to 10 different companies, gone through 10 different assessment processes, and this is really laborious. It's stressful enough trying to get a job on top of your current job or your studies and having to invest hour after hour into that. So I think moving more towards a place where actually a candidate doesn't have to retake the same assessment 100 times, perhaps that data, that information can travel with them between jobs at a company might be something we move towards.
Yeah, excellent. Show of hands, who here in larger organizations or even your mid-sized, small organization are thinking about reinventing the way people are assessed internally? Show of hands. So a fair amount. And so I'm curious, and going back to where we started yesterday, if you were here, the way we are designing jobs is different than the way we're assessing and developing internal talent, which is different than the way we're assessing and selecting external talent in most cases. And I think all of you said it in one form or another. If I, as an individual, go through an assessment, is it for the organization's benefit or is it for my benefit? And is it okay if there's a mutual benefit? So, comments on that in the ideal future state. Do you see us going to a place where if I take this assessment, I'm going to learn about myself and ascertain whether or not this job is going to be a good fit, this organization is going to be a good fit, and if it's not, that I maybe self-select out and that be okay, and I've learned something about myself and I can more appropriately take my next step. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, before we get on to that, just want to say, Revelian, Tom, you do take your assessment result with you for 12 months, so you don't have to do it again. Just a, little plug. Right, where is assessment going in terms of using it externally and internally, and candidate experience? Yes, very important.
Yeah.
I think giving feedback back to candidates about how they may fit or not with, this role, this organisation. I'm thinking, for example, we have a values assessment. It tells the candidate what came up as their top values and their bottom values, and that helps to give them some insight about what might be important to them in a workplace context, which can help them with going to their next organisation, thinking about, okay, is this culture actually going to fit me? So it gives them something back, and I think probably all of us in the way that these providers do assessment will be around thinking about how can we give a better experience to candidates, and part of that is giving them useful insight about themselves, not just providing insight to the organisation. The other thing I was thinking about was like holistic assessment. So rather than, this whole thing about let's do it quickly, let's do it easily, and give insights back, and not just, assess someone's, it used to be, we'll just assess someone's cognitive ability and then we'll screen out all those people in the bottom 30%. But now it's like, well, how can we combine assessments quickly, but also in a way that's really powerful? So let's think about things like, cognitive ability. We know it predicts job performance really well. Let's think about emotional intelligence. We know it affects how somebody interacts with other people. And let's also think about values match, or cultural fit match. And if we can get all of that right, that's a really powerful, gives us a really powerful prediction about how that person's going to go in that job, and also how they're going to last in the organisation, which then helps us to start planning, how can the organisation get value from that, but how can the individual also make sure that they're kind of in a setup for success before they even start. It's going to be a good journey for them. Yeah.
Got it. Because Dave, this gets to the root of why Deeper Signals you founded it with Tomas and others, correct? It's like creating self-awareness, is that right?
Yeah. Fundamentally about trying to help people. I think from Tomas, anyone knows Tomas Chamorro from music, Tomas was concerned about the rise of narcissism in the world, and he wanted, sort of counter that and provide a mirror for people. I think I must be the kind of anti on the panel. I think that too often the way that we think about assessment is like a test or an assessor. It's like a thing. And why don't we start disaggregating that? And why don't we start thinking about having people like for example cognitive assessments. Grades, school grades are a pretty good predictor of how smart you are. If you got a PhD, then, one where you're pretty smart. You're smart enough to do any job. And so I think sometimes, we as vendors, we sell stuff to companies that people, A, don't like, and B, probably shouldn't be doing. And why don't we think about disaggregating the other end? So, like we give someone a report, but why can't that be updated on a regular basis as data changes about who you are and the experiences you had? And produce something like a talent passport that goes with you. The reason that I'm not sure that will ever catch on is that people don't want to show you their real self, do they? They just want to, it's like I want to show you my perfect self, or the kind of whatever it is that you're looking for, and it's not straightforward.
Right, and and just to pick up on that, and is the organization ready to see someone warts and all as well? In other words, appreciating the diversity of the way people show up, because as somebody said
only
earlier,
politicians, yeah.
That is definitely the definition of a can of worms. So, Scott, what are your thoughts here?
I think just a little plug as well. Pymetrics, you can keep your gameplay with you. So one of the unique things that we do is the one-to-many matching. So once you actually apply for a role and you're unsuccessful, it will prompt you the other opportunities within the organisation. So you can look at that in two ways. You can have that as a candidate facing, or you can actually have that as a guidance tool. So before they actually even apply for a role, they can actually go through the assessment and find out which roles actually they're going to be most successful in. So that is something that's unique. And then from a candidate experience, and also give back, if they're unsuccessful, they're also allowed to be find out about other opportunities with Pymetrics clients as well. So if that organisation doesn't use or rejects them, they can actually be passed back out into the marketplace. So we're really conscious about making sure the candidate gets a great experience, they learn something about themselves, but also if an organisation is not going to use them, they also are giving that candidate another opportunity as well.
Got it. Thank you for that. Tom?
Yeah, so to plug that as well. More on that topic. So it's a similar concept. So we kind of having at HireVue, we use the term reusability. So essentially a candidate can reuse their assessment within an organisation to know kind of what they're suited for. And I think it really does come down to that candidate experience point. And I think it was Dr. Charles Handler talked the other day on a podcast. And he said, look, it's not just about shortening the process as much as you can. Your 2-minute assessment, no one's going to buy into that. Because actually the trade-off between the candidate experience and the validity of the assessment, what you're trying to predict, you can't just keep shaving minutes off here and there. So I think it's more about, as you say, still getting that holistic view of the individual, identifying what's important, but then allowing them to use that in a way that's constructive for both the candidate and the company to which they're applying to. I think also one of the challenges that we get, or that I know we face, is the issue around kind of scale. I think that's probably something we're talking a lot about at this conference, is when you're having data on a grand scale and how you manage that. And so I think that's really something that organisations are having to really step up to the plate around. Because we're working with a global workforce, the talent pools could come from anywhere. You're getting tens of thousands of individuals who are applying to a couple of hundred roles. You've got to balance that quality of hire. You've got to balance that process efficiency, that speed, in terms of you getting candidates through the funnel. One of the main reasons why candidates don't accept a job offer is because they've already accepted it somewhere else. So being able to move faster than your competition whilst focusing on what's actually important and creating a good experience for the candidate is something you've really got to balance. And I think it's not easy to do that.
Well, my follow-up question to what you all shared is somewhat of a bit of a summary of the past couple days. Growth mindset, learning agility, the pace of learning, the breadth of learning in the future because the fast changing nature of jobs, the half-life of skills, all this stuff. So I am taken aback. Actually, I'm going to ask a question. Who here is assessing for growth mindset or something similar? So that's shocking to me. So Microsoft transformed their whole culture around growth mindset. We heard part of this story yesterday. And as we look at the need to adapt to the changing nature of work, we all kind of, I think, will agree that that is a critical attribute. So as we're assessing talent, whether it be coming in the organization externally or being developed internally, and what are your thoughts on that? Would you agree that that is important? And is that or something else like the dominant attribute that you're trying to assess for? Or is it totally up to the company that you're serving? Thoughts?
Well, it's up to the company.
Yeah.
What's important to them. Although recently, I think more and more organisations are asking about how can we assess for like learning agility, curiosity, and that growth mindset. I think there's some issues for me around how you assess for a mindset. I would be more comfortable in thinking about this in terms of, traits. There's probably combinations of personality traits, which would indicate levels of things like curiosity. And then maybe if we put that with kind of cognitive ability, we might get some kind of learning agility type of outcome. Somebody else here might know a lot more about this than me, but I'm not in R&D, I'm a consultant, so these are just like my own thoughts.
Well, you handled it well.
Yes, I'm going to hand over.
Dave?
Companies make choices, don't they, in terms of setting strategy. We heard about organisations setting strategy and the importance for driving the kind of analytics and questions that you ask. I think, who was the guy from NAB?
Thomas.
Tom, yeah. So Thomas did a really good presentation, I thought, that showed that. But organisations bet on the future, and as much as you can try and shape it by Microsoft, sometimes you can't forget the Hawthorne effect. So doing anything inside an organisation is better than doing nothing, probably. But I would also say, think hard about the nature of the next couple of generations that are coming through and what they are interested in. So they're both consumers and they're going to be contributors. So think hard about how you might assess the kind of capabilities and qualities that you're looking for just, a bit further down the line.
Definitely hearing growth mindset a lot. Definitely hearing digital readiness. Definitely hearing agile a lot. So we're definitely working with organisations to understand more about that. And obviously, what we do is obviously build custom models based off, what top performers look like that demonstrate those types of traits. So absolutely, that is what we're hearing a lot of, and what we're factoring in as well.
Tom?
Yeah, I think agile was the word that I was thinking kind of throughout that. If I had $1 every time that I got asked, can we assess agile? And then the question you put back to that individual is, okay, well, what do you mean by agile? Like, what do you mean by an agile mindset? And you ask 100 people and you'll get 100 different answers. And I think to your point, you can break these things down generally into saying, oh, well, it's a bit of, this cognitive ability, a bit of these personality traits, whatever, and that kind of ties it together. But what you also run into is part of the challenge is they say, well, actually, look, our current workforce isn't agile. Like, our current people don't have this competency, this capability, but we need you to assess for it. And you're like, well, okay, that puts us in a tough spot because, there's certain steps of rigor you need to go through in order to implement an assessment in an organization. So it's like, hey, this is what we kind of want. And that's being told to you by 2 or 3 HR professionals in a room, and that's deciding the future of hundreds of people, their lives, their families' lives, their friends' lives. So you can't just say, okay, great, here you go. And I think, the traditional approach that we were taking around then having to try and model that on current employees just really wasn't working in that regard. And so trying to move them away more towards that approach where you can combine kind of those individual traits, you combine them in a pre-built way, but then customize that to what you're looking for from an organization. You kind of then can straddle the line between saying, hey, look, we don't have to go off what you currently have, but we have to do this in baby steps. We can't just suddenly build something crazy and radical out for you. So, I think the agile mindset is the piece that really organizations are coming to us to as technology becomes increasingly prevalent.
Got it. Well, I have 2 more questions, and I want to open up to the floor. And the questions relate to you all here if you're in role as a practitioner. So of the organizations that are using assessments well, what have they done? What are some of the commonalities that you see across your portfolio of clients that say, okay, they're doing things well, they were really smart about making this decision or improving this process? What can you say about those high-performing companies?
Well, I've been with Revelian for 2 months, so my experience of our particular clients is less so than maybe some of my colleagues at the back of the room. But I'm thinking about like the basics of using psychometric assessment in an effective, fair, reliable, valid way. Yeah. So using the right the starting point is using the right assessment for the role. Yeah. Using it at the right point in the process. Using it with a real understanding before you start of what it is you're actually looking for, rather than just this kind of scattergun, we'll just assess for this and then we'll kind of talk about it at the end and then we'll ignore the results afterwards. Thinking like, what's the so what do you want to get out of it? Why are you using it at that particular point? How are you going to use the results?
Hey, staying with that for a second, because I've had this... I'm not cynical, but I am I'm not hesitant to call out what's happening in the world. And so what I have seen is a lot of HR leaders and technology decision makers be overly passive and rely maybe too much on the vendor community or consultants to make decisions on their behalf. So you said, hey, you have to know what you want. So have you seen organizations that have been successful to actually pause, create the space to really define what they want? What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for those of you who couldn't hear, getting a group together and mapping the solution. And my pointed question to the panelists, in organizations that are doing this well, have they created the space? Do they have a confident, inspiring narrative to say, okay, we are going to assess for growth mindset. We know the people that we want in the organization. Because again, I've seen many not really know, and they've over-relied on somebody else, and then a couple years passes, they move on, and things shift. So again, I'm not coming across as cynical. What I'm trying to echo is we need to create the space. We need to form that narrative, in my opinion. So Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my colleague Shane Nealon from Peter Berry Consultancy answered it pretty well. I'll give you a case study from the Hogan assessment world is probably PepsiCo, who have used a very thoughtful approach. A guy called Alan Church published a great deal in our world on the use of assessment, both for selection and then through development and then into executive coaching. Pepsi have a very well thought out model of the kinds of people they want in different roles, and they are careful about measuring whether or not that model still stands and the impacts that they get. So, there's a good example.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, Scott, what are your thoughts? Have you seen
Yeah, I mean, because we're building custom, we obviously work with the client to understand, what are the business outcomes they actually want to achieve, and so we actually build for that, and obviously measure that as well. So not only do we do ROI studies, so that we've seen massive gains in terms of efficiencies, but also diversity gains and also performance gains as well. So with the predictability studies that we do, so we have an idea about the types of or the anticipated expectations that we can deliver, and so we agree on those metrics up front, and then we are really clear on what we actually are able to deliver in terms of that and when we're going to deliver that as well. So that's one of the exciting things about building custom.
Cool. Tom?
I think really, going to go into the question from the audience, the key thing you should be asking these clients is what's the problem you're trying to solve? Assessment solves problems. Assessments aren't something you should just be putting on your marketing page. The number one thing I hate is when you go to a client, you say, hey, why have you approached HireVue? And they say, oh, we want AI. Like, that's it. Oh, we want AI. I've been told to get AI. You do AI. Like, where do I sign?
Yeah.
And the salespeople love it because it means they've got a deal on the table. But then actually, it never goes through because actually the customer doesn't know what it is they're really trying to affect. AI isn't the outcome; it's the process which gets you to an outcome, and you can attach it to a number of different things in the HR space. So it's tying it back to a problem that a company is trying to solve, and then tailoring your solution to fit that need, rather than simply putting it in place because everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, I love it. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, sorry. Just coming back to that point is that I think you see a lot of fads within HR professionals a lot of the time, like, oh, the new shiny thing is agile, right. The new shiny thing is AI. But actually, thinking about what Thomas said earlier around why we reinventing the wheel, why not just kind of go with the data that we already know exists. So we already know things like cognitive ability predict job performance. We already know emotional intelligence can help, predict customer satisfaction. Like, we know this stuff. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, like, using the stuff that we actually already know, that we have loads and loads of data around, rather than trying to find this new thing that we don't really know what it is, like we don't know what agile is, for example. Sometimes there's benefit also in just kind of going back to the science and just being like, well, we know this stuff is real, so right. Let's just do that.
Bring it to
Let's
life,
start with that.
Right. No, your point's really well taken, and as is yours to understand the business problem and get that coalition built internally. So this is my final question, although, as you know, I can find many more. So, but I know we're getting towards the end of the day. Most of you, if not all of you, have been here for the past couple of days, and I'm sure you have your thoughts, impressions, and ideas. So if we come back, and we have full intention to come back in 12 months, what would you hope you see in either the people analytics discipline more broadly or the assessment area more specifically? Your thoughts?
I'd like to see more case studies, so more organisations in Australia doing something with their people data, even if they're just starting out, like actually starting to make some headway and use their analytics. And in terms of assessment, I think I'd like to see more evaluation. I don't know about you guys, but oftentimes the last thing clients want to do is actually evaluate whether what they're predicting for is getting the outcomes that they want. And then if you don't have that data, then you can't feed back into the model at the beginning. Right. And it's that whole cycle. So kind of more understanding of ROI and the importance of evaluating.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that, because I'm sure we all have leaders in our organizations. Oh, I just spent $1 million for that new core HR system. Where's my insight? And it's like, well, that's not how we generate the insight. We do it through analytics. So thank you for that. Dave?
Yeah, I'd love to see more case studies. I think people learn really well from stories, and as human animals, we copy other other people do. So that's much more interesting. As an innovation, I'd dearly love to see some kind of standardization around the criteria that we use, the variables that we measure. I can't believe someone hasn't built a business that actually kind of lets a company just drop a whole bunch of stuff in, use some standard measurement processes and produce some data that we're not collecting at all. So if anyone wants to talk to me about an idea after, then...
Thanks, Dave. Scott?
Yeah, I agree with the case studies, and I think it's being more willing to try new things. I think there's a lot of hard skills inventory going taking place at the moment, and they're looking at where they can shift people. And it's not only the hard skills that are really important; it really is those soft skills and being able to be adaptable and move talent within it. So I think it's being progressive and actually starting to use some of the tools that are available.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, I'd probably like to see the academics and the lawmakers really catching up with the vendors, to be honest. I think we get to a state where the rate of technology advancing means that actually kind of the vendors have outstripped the guys working behind it to kind of validate a lot of the work and actually decide how it should be governed and how it should be regulated. I know we've heard a lot, this last couple of days about how some of the vendors here are working with different bodies and different governments to help define those standards. I know HireVue are, and I know that some of you guys are as well. Because we have a responsibility not only to self-govern, which is kind of how we're currently doing this, and we'll happily talk at length about how we approach validity, reliability, ethics, and AI. But we also need to make sure that, as an industry, we're held accountable by someone.
Yep.
And I think that we also need to be pushing the envelope, which we've used a lot the last couple of days. But we really should be pushing the envelope around what those standards are and making sure that is upheld kind of across the industry.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And of course, Heather Whiteman talked about the standards work that's going on in EUS, which is going to relate to ISO 9000 and hopefully getting international certifications around that. That being said, this is a really hard thing to do. And having been involved in that project almost 10 years ago, just agreeing on headcount was a difficult discussion. So we do have ways to go, but I firmly believe we'll get there, particularly as we view investments in people as truly investments as it just costs. So if any other final questions, then I'm just going to make this statement. Thank you very much for your insights and ideas. Really appreciate you contributing. Well done.